Okay, there we are. All right, great. All right, let's call this special meeting of the Board of Education to order. Can we please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, thank you to whoever joined me in that. Okay, first up, I'm so happy. This is a reason alone to have a special board meeting, is our staff recognition of our 2022 GPS Representative Connecticut Teacher of the Year, Dr. Jones. I turn this over to you.
Well, I'm getting ready to turn it over to our guest tonight, but I want to say that it was such an honor and a pleasure. Dr. Caravillo and I were able to be in Tyler's classroom, and you know, I think in the quote that I put out, it was like a master lesson in amazing teaching. Not only were the kids just totally engaged in the lesson, but one of the things that really, I think, was so wonderful was that she had provided the demographic of the classroom, and there were several children who were on an IEP. There were several children who were 504. There were general education students. Every single one of them were engaged, and you would know who's who. I mean, it's just everybody was learning at the highest level. So it was truly my honor to visit her classroom. So thank you, Tyler, for that. And I'm going to turn it over to Marlene Gilbert, who's going to, I believe, speak a little bit about the honor.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. I'm Marlene Gilbert. I'm chair of the Distinguished Teachers Awards Committee. On behalf of DTAC, I would like to congratulate Tyler McCosey on being Greenwich's nominee for the Connecticut Teacher of the Year program. Tyler has been a science teacher at Western Middle School for the past 11 years. During her tenure at Western, she has taught 7th and 8th grade science, 7th grade STEM electives, as well as mathematics support classes. Over the past 9 years, she has been the science department learning facilitator, taking the lead in developing and implementing the district curricula. Beyond her role in the classroom, Tyler values being a lifelong learner. She's constantly in pursuit of professional knowledge, attending conferences, and completing continuing education credits. She's always looking for ways to further students' learning and increase their motivation. Tyler contributes to the Western Middle School community outside of her role as a teacher. She coaches soccer, basketball, and softball. She developed the first annual Advisor-Based Olympics and has served as the Saturday academic coordinator and teacher. Her colleagues are inspired by her energy, enthusiasm, and general love for elevating Western Middle School and its students. We know Tyler will make Greenwich proud as its representative to the Connecticut Teacher of the Year program. Thank you.
And then me.
Yeah, Christine Edwards is gonna, from Kiwanis, is also gonna speak.
I'm the president of the Kiwanis. Can you hear me okay? Yes, thank you. And for over 30 years, the Kiwanis have been offering a gift to the person who wins and is selected as the Greenwich candidate to go to the state. And this is in honor of Joseph Kay, who was very active with the Board of Ed and a very active president of the Kiwanis. So I will be presenting this to you personally, Tyler. And in the meantime, we have a check that is for you, for your education or for whatever else you might like to use it for, with great acclaim that you have been selected. It's a wonderful read to see everything that you've done, and you are really a great candidate going forward. And we hope you win for the state and go again to the national. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Is that Dr. Jones? Do you have anything else?
I think, Tyler, did you want to say a quick word?
I did. I just wanted to say that it has been so wonderful to hear everyone saying so many nice things. And of course, to invite you all into my classroom and into my teaching experience for the last 11 years. It's been a little bit more private, and to make it more public has been just wonderful, because Western is an absolutely fantastic place and the kids are amazing. And for you all to see that just means the world to me. And I just really appreciate the fact that you all have been able to recognize that. And thank you so much for everything.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you for all you do, especially after we know a tough few years. So this was especially special. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Who is on our, Ms. Costin, did you want to say anything? I know you were this committee rep, correct?
So I was not, there was some communication issues. And so I was not in attendance at those meetings, but I congratulate the committee on their work. And I congratulate our wonderful winner. So well done.
There you go. So now you just got to make a special thank you. So excellent. All right. Thank you so much. Dr. Jones, I was actually thinking, could we just take this opportunity to recognize one member of our staff perhaps that's leaving?
Sure.
Yeah, and I think that's Mr. O'Keefe, who I sort of remain in denial that he's leaving, and I know we're keeping him working to the very end, but as we do staff recognitions, I think he was a very important part of our staff that we all just wanted to say thank you to. I know the whole board feels that way.
Yeah, and I don't know if he was on. He was actually looking for the link a few minutes ago.
Great. All right. Well, I don't even get credit for that. Okay, then you could do it again later.
And then he does come back on.
Good, good. All right, well then let's just go into our action items, if that's okay. Everyone, thank you so much again for joining us, and good luck as our representative to Connecticut. Yay. Okay. So I'm just going to put the first action item on the table, and that is to approve the Junior Innovators elective course for middle school as presented. May I have a second?
Second.
Okay, Ms. Downey, thank you so much. Okay, discussion. Mr. Bermonti, is there anything, or do you guys have any questions? We want to take this straight to a vote. Does anyone have a question?
Karen Hirsch has a
I do.
question.
Thank you. I just had to find my hands. Karen Hirsch, go ahead. Ms. Hirsch.
Oh, I was just going to say, I had sent in a couple of questions. I know that there's not necessarily some answers yet, but I didn't know if, if we don't have enough students that have applied or to run this starting in the fall, is this something you would consider starting mid-year? I just know I had asked, and I know that there was some interest, but we weren't sure about the numbers. And so that was a quick
Well,
question.
I could speak to that. I think typically, well, good news is I've already got some applications, actually today, which is kind of cool. In this process, even at the high school, we're about a week into the process, and I typically give a month. It's not uncommon not to hear a whole lot back from the students themselves. I've got a lot of feedback from the teachers with the names of the students that they're going to recommend or encourage to apply. So I don't really see the numbers being a problem. If there is a case where, let's say, there aren't enough, we could certainly do let's call it a roadshow in the science classes early in the year to really drum up the interest. The delicate line that you walk is to, really, you're trying to select the students that are really interested. So to just say, all right, here's, give me a bunch of names, it's probably not the best thing, but we'll have to gauge it as we go. But I personally don't foresee it as a problem. Today, as a matter of fact, I was at Riverside, and a couple of my kids, 3 of my research kids, do a little STEM fair after school, and they basically have gotten together with these kids for 2 months. And so we're 4th graders, and I mentioned this, hopefully it wasn't out of turn, and the kids were just so excited to understand that this possibility is out there for them in middle school.
The more we can encourage the rigor and the excitement
Yeah.
and for students to kind of get involved in these things, I think the better.
Yeah.
The other one is less of a question for you. And I know I'd asked Dr. Jones, but I will just put this out there is that, I know that this was supposed to run from 7 to 7:45. We certainly don't want it to start any earlier because we moved school start times back for a reason. But that gives basically 15 minutes for the students to exit the classrooms at the high school, to get onto a bus at the, if we are providing a bus, because I assume we would need to get onto a bus and in a 15-minute window, and then get to Central probably wouldn't be an issue, but for Western or Eastern, that's a very tight time frame for them to get from a classroom at the high school onto a bus to their school and then to their classroom. And because the bell rings for class to begin at our middle schools at 8 a.m. So, I know Dr. Jones had sort of given me a bit of a response. I know you're still sort of working some of that out, but just so that others can hear what that response might be, I'll ask that here. How you think that, we have a middle school principal on who might also be able to answer, but how that will work if we have students who might be missing some of their core class time if they're running late due to
Yeah,
bus.
I did check back in with Tara and Andy, who had also checked in with the middle school principals, and there's not a big concern about it. Tara, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think they're going to try to line up with science so that if for some reason the bus was running late, these are all very, very high performing students. So if they arrived one day a week, and if we'll try to fix the issue, which is what happened last year with the math class we were running, we had to adjust the time a little bit. So we'll keep an eye on that according to which building they're going to. Sarah, I saw you raise your hand. Go ahead.
Yeah, I can just piggyback off of that. At 2 of our middle schools, we do know that there are specials blocks at those very first few days. So we don't anticipate them being more than maybe 5 to 10 minutes late, and it is once a week. And as Dr. Jones said, these are students who there would be an expectation that they're making up any missed work. If it was something that's problematic, we can address it on a broader level. And for the schools that they do not have a special block at 8th grade first period, we would work to make sure that it's a science class that they're in. Obviously, Andy can work with the science teacher. And if there is missed work, I think that there'd be allowances there because we understand these students are high performers who are highly motivated and engaged to get work done.
Thank you.
Karen Kowalski.
Yeah, I think you may have answered this question with the answer of you don't see it being a problem, but the specific question I have is, to the extent, because it's a little, you may not get all of the applications that you're looking for. If you don't have numbers, would you still run? You would still run the program, correct? So if you don't have 12 students, let's say you have 6 students, you would still run the program for that particular middle school?
Yeah, well, I can mention that. Yeah, I think so. I mean, just to, sort of use an example of the high school process, when I'm doing this now for about 18 years, so I started as an infant, I just throw that out. But when I first started, the collective enrollment may have been about 20 to 24 kids. And as it's, so that was the beginning of it. And as it started to get traction and kids started to, it sort of, while the course is it's not Science Fair 101, it's about teaching the notion of research. Success begets success, and so it gets noticed. And that's kind of how the thing starts to evolve. So to answer your question, yeah, I would think so. Just to get
okay. And then my last question is for Tony, and it's a follow along to Karen's questions on buses. I believe we said there very little incremental cost, and I think maybe it was $2,500 for the cost of this, which was already in the budget. But with respect to just the additional buses, they're hopping on a bus to go to a school. Will we incur any additional bus costs to have that bus run from the high school to the middle school for that one extra day, or is that just it's just a non-factor?
We're going to try to have it to be a non-factor, but it's so early right now. Remember, we have a brand new bus company. So as we're resetting routes for the fall, but this is not unusual that we'll have a student for whatever reason where we pick up a student and drop them off because of some issue that we're having with the buses. So I don't anticipate this being a major issue for us. And each building is literally one morning a week. And at right around that time when they're finished, we've got all of those high school buses that are unloading, and they're all going somewhere, either back to the bus barn or to run another route. So it's really figuring out which direction they're going in, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, thank you. I appreciate it. I don't have any other questions.
Cool. All right, anyone else? Okay, then let's bring this to a vote. We have to do the roll call since we're virtual. So I'll start. Kathleen Stowe, yes. Karen Hirsch.
Yes.
Michael Joseph Mercante Anthony.
Yes.
Laura Costin.
Yes.
Christina Downey.
Yes.
Who do I have next on my thing? Cody Kittle. Maybe he doesn't hear us since he's driving. Okay, Cody? No?
Yep,
Okay.
yes.
Yes, okay. Joe Kelly?
Yes.
Okay, that was everyone, right? Did I get everyone?
I don't think you got me.
Oh, I'm sorry, Karen Kowalski. I'm sorry, my screen is, have a little funky screen, so I'm trying to sort it out. Karen Kowalski.
Yes.
Okay, was that everyone? Yes, okay, thank you. That passes 8-0. I'm gonna work on my screen shot here. Okay, next up is the second action item. I'll just read it to get on the table. I make a motion to approve the revised fiscal year 2024 budget procedures as presented. Can I get a second?
Second.
Okay, Ms. Downey, thank you. Okay, is Sean on now?
Yes, I am.
Okay, you made a few changes. Can you just walk us through them if you don't mind?
Sure. They're highlighted in red and it's based on input from Karen and Christina. And I'll just go through them quickly. Under the budget development procedures, we eliminated the year. It's basically just aligned with the GPS strategic plan period. That was in two places on the first page and the second page. We also made sure that we had utilization of ESSER and ARP grant funding for both operating and capital. We also added in capital ADA compliance number 5. And finally, we on the new number 11 on capital, town capital improvement program, CIP procedures, we including any revisions. So that takes into consideration the fact that the formats have changed, the process has changed, the dates have changed. So I think we got everything covered.
Great. Any questions? Yes, sorry, Michael Joseph, and then Karen Kowalski. Michael Joseph.
Yeah, thanks. I hate to be that guy, but I just think, thanks, Sean. I appreciate all the changes. And I know it was a short week. We just looked at this on Thursday and things like that. But and I know this is I know better than anyone, this is the busiest time of year. As much as we can moving forward, we really have to avoid getting these documents the day of. It's just really hard for all of us to do our due diligence, to not get these documents ahead of time, so that we can. This wasn't the most extensive document, but just as far as the process goes, it's just really something I think we need to strive to do, to get these things to the board days ahead of time, so that we have time to look at it.
Okay. Karen Kowalski.
Thanks. So I obviously echo Michael's comments on the timing. This is not the first time that's happened that we just get something late, and it's hard to focus in on a time. And lucky enough that there isn't as many changes in this as we've seen in other places, but we just, for our own thoughtfulness, we just need to have these things in advance. I have one question. I went through and noticed I just did a quick compare and contrast from last year's, which is the changes just really seem to be, which are what you have underscored in the red track changes. My question though is, these haven't changed from year to year. It seems like at least they didn't change from last year, other than the few minor changes that we've made. Do they need to, I guess is my question. For example, is our process getting more robust that we need to take a harder line on these? And I'm not saying we do it this year, but for building out our process, are there other changes from your perspective, Sean, that we should be making that make sense to make sure that the robust process that you and Dr. Jones go through on really just consecutive basis is accounted for here. I feel like this is just such a simplistic document for what you actually do. And I don't know if we could make this better. So that's my question are there things here that we could do to make this document better? Because it just seems to be the same thing every year.
It is overly simplistic, and there's a ton more that go into it. I mean, we could replace it with a step-by-step job description of what I do and what my staff does. But, I think this is, this list is a pretty commonsensical list of items that we consider when we go through the document. I think the biggest of which is adhering to the BET guidelines. I view that as probably one of the biggest things that we look at when we're putting together the budget.
Okay. Look, I think you have like 3 days left or 2 days left. And I want to just make sure that we get the last ounce of wisdom that you have before you depart us, in the sense of, do we have the right document here? And that's why I want to know if there's anything else that we can build on. Even give it some thought over the next couple of days. And if there's anything that comes to mind that you would make some suggestions on, I think the board would be appreciative of it.
Okay.
Mr. Kelly.
Yeah, thank you, Sean. I think we should seriously consider firing Sean prior to him resigning. I think maybe the things I've heard might warrant that. Sean, thank you for your hard work and what you've done. I don't want to steal your thunder, Kathleen, but I found the opportunity and I won't have it again to fire Sean. So I don't think we'll have that opportunity again. So thank you.
Do
I get unemployment, Joe?
Exactly. You can't fire me. I quit.
Don't think we can fire him, but hey.
Joe, that's great. Oh, especially because I made this big praise of Sean. He wasn't even on. It was like I was just talking to the 8 of you. Okay. So anyway, so I mean, we see these budget resolutions every year, and I think you made the appropriate changes for this year, especially because of the new funding around, and we asked you to do that around ARP and the SR ARP grant funding. So. And I see the red line. So I'm comfortable with this. I mean, any other questions? Otherwise, I'm going to bring this to a vote. Okay. Kathleen Stowe, yes. Michael Joseph Mercante Anthony.
Yes.
Okay. Laura Costin.
Yes.
Christina Downey.
Yes.
Joe Kelly.
Yes.
Karen Kowalski.
Yes.
Karen Hirsch.
Yes.
Cody Kittle.
Yes.
Okay, that passes 8-0. Thank you very much. And you can see I also figured out my screen. Okay. All right. So that's that. Okay. Now, next we're doing things backwards today. We did the action items, then we did the discussion, which I think will be a little bit harder. So the first discussion item is the Hamilton Avenue School fields. And I'm just going to open with, this is not a typical conversation for us to really be having at a board level. And, I decided to add it to the agenda for better or for worse, because I thought this is a conversation that's very much happening in the community. And so I thought, in the interest of transparency and the fact that this is a Board of Ed asset, that this is something that we should get all of the stakeholders involved in and just discuss at this level. But again, this is just a discussion, nothing more at this time. I do have to say, the one thing is that since we just sort of put it on there, I don't feel like the PTA has really had a chance to weigh in and to hear their thoughts. And so that is a huge miss. And so I do think that that's something that we also have to consider. But given that, let me turn it over and Dr. Jones, see if you have anything else, and then we could open it to questions, or if you want to turn it over to your team, let's figure that out.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you just said, literally while I'm on this call, I just got an email from one of the PTA officers, because, I realized this morning, we just put this on yesterday, and we really haven't discussed it at any of their PTA meetings. And I wasn't even sure that they even really knew. So the principal set up a meeting this afternoon for me, just so I could make sure that the co-presidents were aware of the discussion, because it is their field. And they really kind of, one of them was aware, one of them not so much. The one that was aware had looked at the board docs, but didn't really understand kind of what the conversation was. So, I think we've been talking about this since March. That's when I got the very first email. It's been a couple of months. And I think that, there are two concerns. It really started out talking about the geothermal. And I believe that's, again, everything we've been able to discover. That's why that memo that's on board docs exists from 2009 is we would not have, to get our certificate of occupancy that was required of the school superintendent at that time. And I just, after watching this the last few months, I can't imagine how difficult that was for the school superintendent. And that, again, that happened back in 2009. But the second layer to it is that, is, we've had a lot of conversations, obviously Park and Rec, person who manages the field. We've had a conversation with the building department, just trying to put the big pictures together. One of the big issues that I know the parents are definitely going to have is we've invested heavily trying to get their field in a better shape. And we invested, I think it was $465, and Dan, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's around $500,000 to level the field and then to start like planting grass and trying to get the grass to grow. It is not in wonderful shape. And Dan can talk more about why. And part of that is the requirements that we have on our school property in the town of Greenwich. But they have gone back, and Tim Coughlin chimed in literally in the last 2 weeks or so to say he's the one that kind of is helping, managing the field piece. He's seeded at 3 different times. He has gone back in and aerated 3 different times. Doesn't feel like the grass is healthy. It's going to take a while at Ham Ave. And one of the pieces that was cut out of the budget when we had our budget request was irrigation. So that obviously makes it a little more difficult, especially if we have a dry summer. So there's a lot of concern that with heavy equipment, a lot of traffic on the field, that it's also going to damage what little grass we have going right now. So I just share that because I know all of you don't have the history. You probably weren't on the board, paying attention when we asked for money to repair the field on behalf of the community. But the bigger layer with the grass is that when we planned this project, we didn't know we were going to be in COVID. And we started this project right when COVID hit. So all of 1920, the children did not have their field, while everybody else around the district was eating outside and playing games and trying to use outdoor space. They had almost zero, it was minimal. And so part of the concern, I think, from the PTA, and again, we'd want to get a broader involvement, but it's not even like if the grass is damaged, we could immediately just go in and fix it, because when you seed, it's still going to take, well, when we did it last time, it took months to restore. If we even did a high quality grass and you roll out the turf, it's generally anywhere from, up to 6 weeks. I know Dan said today, he can't imagine that the field would be open September or October. So that's an issue that I don't think has had enough discussion, that we cannot lose this field for these children. And in fact, I think if something happened that the grass was damaged, we would probably just let it be kind of muddy and yucky and have them on it anyway, because they just can't go without it again. They went without it for an entire year. So I'll just leave it at that. But there's been a lot of work and a lot of effort. Everybody's heart is in the right place. We're all trying to do the right thing. The town staff, the school staff, everybody's just trying to kind of weigh in and say, here's what we see. Here are the challenges. And the grass one is one that I haven't been able to hear anybody that has a really good solution for it, where we don't lose the field for children. So I'll stop there.
Okay, thank you. Karen Hirsch.
So I know you mentioned that this has been, a discussion topic since March. I just learned about some of it, much like PTA members. And so I've spent my whole day sort of trying to do some due diligence. And I have always been a proponent of being a good neighbor to our community members. But our responsibility is first and foremost to our schools, our students, and making sure, yes, we don't lose yet another field. I know, we are already down a large one for that community at Western. So, I had gone back and tried to find the documents from 2009 about the geothermal field. I know our town has something on our website that, talks about the geothermal field being part of our green initiative. It reduces our fees by a third, what have you. There doesn't seem to be any documentation that we can find from 2009. And we've redone some of the field in 2019. I know that geothermal field takes up a large part of that field. I spoke to the designer of that, and he went through what could happen if it gets damaged. But ultimately, there's just a lot of back and forth and misinformation out there. I'd really think, especially to support the use of this field for our school and our PTA, even prior to outside use, is I'd really like to ask that we as a board making a formal request to have the site reviewed, somebody to come to the site, review it, look at the documentation, things that we have, and let us know going forward, any changes that have happened. Maybe we can actually use this field or parts of this field in different ways than we had previously understood in 2009. And I get a risk management report. I mean, I'd like to be able to have the opportunity to use this field for our school, for our PTA, and possibly for community members in other ways. But I feel like there's a lot of different pieces that are moving around, and we don't have all of that information. I also know I had asked Dan, and I don't know if we have this answer. You know, we have a whole policy, we have a process and procedure for renting our fields. It requires you to submit documentation, requires insurance, it requires the site plan to be submitted of where you want to put things, it requires our fire marshals to review all of this and 101 other things. It's not a board usually decision. So I understand that we have an MOU on this. But one of the questions I did have is, you know, I know that we rent out our fields for athletic use. We use it, you know, the town and other rec leagues. The question I had asked for Dan is, I don't recall having rented out our fields to outside entities for use for things like this before. And I'm just hoping to see if we ever have in the past, other than this particular field for St. Roch's. I really would love to be able to find a way to kind of move this forward and have the information in hand to do it if we can properly. I know that they've used our parking lot for years and have done so for 13 years. So even if we have to do this and wait one more year for the access, that, you know, I want to just do this so we get the information. So my request, my discussion at least, is to see if we can do a study and get a risk management report. And if Dan has any information, if we've ever rented any of our school fields out to outside entities for purposes such as this, like carnivals, fairs, other fundraising and community activities like this with heavy equipment.
I'll jump in real quick. I have not, and I've only been here 4 years. And I don't rent the fields out. There's a whole process. It's got to go through the business office. I would sign off on it. We do rent the fields out to various athletic organizations, whether it's a camp or something like that. Some of the schools, PTAs, have their, like the powwow at North Mianus, but as far as any other outside group, not that I'm aware of.
I mean, I don't know if we can go back and look. We don't have that for now, but I think it's just sort of an important point to have. And I don't know what the other board members' thoughts are on maybe doing our own look at the field. So I'll just leave that there for the moment.
Cool. Thanks. Lots of hands. Okay, Joe, I think you were the next hand.
Thank you. Well, I don't have a dog in this fight, but I do like pizza frites. So I do enjoy those when I go to the St. Roch's Fair. And I guess my take on this is that when an organization or a group, especially one that historically has used a facility and they're told that they can't have a permit, I do believe that any group has the chance and opportunity to ask why if they're turned down. And if they don't understand or believe that reason is good enough, I do believe any part of the community as a group or even as an individual can do further research and find out why the reason they're being told that they can't use a public piece of property, in this case, a very hot commodity, which is green space in that part of town, why they can't use it. Now, this specific instance with the group from St. Roch, they've been doing this, from what I understand, for 91 years. And there was some changes done to the field, and those changes about in 2009 prohibited them from using this field for their feast. They're asking why they can't use the feast, not just this year, but in previous years. They got more aggressive on asking that question. In my opinion, every part of the community should have the ability, if given that things are suitable, to use those assets. And this is an asset where we have some conditions on that asset which need to be taken into consideration. So what I hesitate to do, and I'm concerned with, is saying no to groups without a good reason, and taking those groups and not sitting down with them and discussing how the answer can be yes. If we have to say something as extreme as saying, well, you could use the field, but you can't step on the field as a condition. Well, that would be a yes, but you can't step on the field. So obviously that's not a realistic solution to the problem, because that does not give the opportunity for the St. Roch's folks to be able to use the field. So what I think needs to be done is we need to have an opportunity for that community group. And we did see there's a lot of numbers in that group, in a bunch of communications that took place in the last couple of days, concerned citizens that want that opportunity to be heard and to say, listen, we like this for this reason. And I think we've got an obligation. If the buck stops with us, which I'm still not quite sure it does, but if the buck does stop with us, then we at least hear what their goals are, and then we tell them what our limitations and restrictions are, give them conditions for the use of the field, where maybe they can use it for, I believe a week or so ago, the PTA had bouncy castles on that field. And if we're allowing bouncy castles on the field, just as an example, we tell the St. Roch folks, well, you can't do possibly Ferris wheels, but you could do bouncy castles, or you could have dunk tanks, or you could have a lot of other things, but you can't have certain things. I do believe that we should create the opportunity to sit down and tell them, yes, you could use the field, but under these restrictions. And there are also conditions within those restrictions that we need to replace the field, not just to the condition that it's in, but to a better condition, because we need that field to have a better condition. I was contacted, or we were contacted just recently about from people in the St. Roch's group. And Kathleen, I think it was you who mentioned about the irrigation was cut out of the budget. Was that Tony? I believe that the St. Roch's group has offered to pay for irrigation in that field. So if it was cut out of the budget, if that can be created as an opportunity to better the situation by allowing this group to use the field, well, then we have to consider those things. It might not be a solution, but at least this group deserves the opportunity for us to sit down with them and tell them what they can and cannot do, not just telling them no. I don't believe no is an answer I'd like to receive, and I think they deserve the opportunity to sit down and explain what they can, or explain to them what they can and what they can't do.
Okay, Karen Kowalski, you were next.
Thanks. So first, I'm not sure why we're talking about this, to be quite honest. It doesn't seem to me that this is within the purview of the board. There are a handful of policies, 3515 and 1330, which I will also point out to Ms. Downey that we should look at, because some of that language is conflicting and we need to fix that. But also, we have a regulation in place on all of this, and this seems to be going to really the operations of the school, which from what I've been told is not what the board is in charge of. And so there is policies and procedures that govern how this works. And if I look to this, the question seems to be that it is solely sits within the administration until they flat out reject it. And then if they reject it and they want to, the church wants to come back and appeal it, I suppose the board under our policy could take that up. But I don't think that's where we're at. So I don't know why we're having this discussion, because it seems to me that this is solely sits within the administration and they need to make a decision as to how they want to do this. And yes, I agree with Ms. Hirsch that there are, within our regulations, there is a whole host of things and paperwork that need to be filled out in regards to the type of activity, the insurance in place, the expense and the cost. Those are all things that have been put in place. And in fact, earlier this year, I even asked whether or not we as a board had gone back to look at our expense chart to make sure that we were appropriately charging those that were using our facilities based upon this regulation and policy. And I was told that it was in order. So I think we end up on a very slippery slope at this point, because if we're entertaining this particular conversation, then are we going to entertain the conversations for other activities that are happening at the schools? Or is OGGRC going to be coming to us for all of their soccer field games that they're going to be playing on the fields? Are we going to be dealing with all the Girl Scouts that are going to be using the facilities? Like, where does it stop on when they come to us and we're going to be having these discussions? I just don't think this conversation is ripe for us. But since we're having it, now I'm going to ask some questions, which is one, what I'm a little confused about is this 91-year factor. They've been doing this for 91 years, but then it stopped at 2009. And so they haven't done it from 2009, since 2009, since we got the one report, but they've done it consecutively for 91 years at the school. So can someone just clarify this 91 years thing if someone knows on this call?
Joe, you seem to know the most.
Well, I wasn't around 91 years ago.
Neither
so
was I, thank
I
God.
can't
but-
make a reference to the beginning of the event, but I had been involved in some of the conversations about this. And I'm just going by according to what they're claiming is that field has been, and I did hear from some individuals that it has been, I'm not sure that 91 is the exact number, but certainly it's a lot of years, and they've been picking that number consistently, that the church has used that field for their feast. I can't say whether it have or haven't.
Yeah, so I guess I'm just, and if this came out in 2009 and they haven't been hosting it since 2009, why all of a
Karen,
sudden-
it's my understanding they're hosting it in a different location.
They've
Okay.
hosted it every year, and they have just not had access to our field since 2009. They've used our parking lot, but the Hamilton Avenue parking lot.
Okay,
And they've had Ferris wheels and all their other rides still in that location. So they just haven't had access to the Hamilton
Okay.
Avenue field for this
so
purpose.
again, this isn't right for us because we don't have any information, because my one item was why all of a sudden is are they, so hot on Hamilton Avenue fields? I don't get it. So that's question number one. On the issue of grass and it being cut up by all of this stuff, what does the Cos Cob Elementary School grass and North Miami School grass look like after they host their their rides? I mean, I don't know, because isn't that somewhat of a, I guess, a litmus test for what Hamilton Avenue's grass is going to look like?
Dr. Jones, I think you did a little research there, right? Go
Yeah,
ahead.
I did. I had a big conversation with Angela Schmidt, the principal who's been there for a long time, because that's one of the questions I had as well. First of all, she reminded me that they have very hardy grass. It's not like the type of grass we're talking about at Ham Ave that's brand new. But they take their carnival equipment and they pull it up closer to the school, out by where the blacktop area is, along the sidewalk area, and they don't go all the way out to kind of where their bigger field area is. And with the way that their grass is right now, the company that does it, I don't know if this is the same company that would do it, but they put down hay on top of the grass and they move it. She said they have experienced either once or twice where they've had some complete damage and they had to bring in the grass, roll out the turf. But again, it's in an area of the playground it's a lot bigger playground than Ham Ave. So you have a lot more space. And, I also asked, Mark's not on tonight, but I asked him about Glenville just out of curiosity, because they have a beautiful field. That's why Glenville doesn't have their carnival, because the fields are used so much and they need to keep them healthy. So they used to have theirs, I guess they still do. And post-COVID, they will, down by the train station in the commuter lot. So every one of these sites is a little bit different.
Glenville does it in the park. They have it in their parking lot on the concrete.
So I mean, part of what has the church even submitted an application so that we understand in fact what they want to do? Because until they actually submit an application and fill out all the paperwork and give us a plan of what they're doing, I just don't know why we're having this conversation, because we don't know where they're going to put anything. We don't know what remediation steps they're
Karen,
gonna.
let me jump in on the timing, because you brought that up a couple times. If you don't mind, may I just?
Please, yes.
They've submitted an application for the permit to host the event there. The application for the permit that they've had in previous years before 2009. And as I said, I don't know the history after 2009, but the application to the permit was denied.
Okay, so again, I don't know why it's here. So that's my point. I just think that this is not right for this board. This rests with other bureaucracies within Greenwich to make these decisions. And if they've made those decisions, there's an appeal process, then that should be taken. I just don't think that this is for us to decide. And we certainly have zero information before us in order to have an intelligent conversation about it. We just can't. And I think we're on a very slippery slope as to how we deal with this or any other institution that comes before us and using their facilities. And I quite frankly don't want to have these conversations. I want to have more conversations about academics and science classes. And I don't want to be talking about this or garbage anymore. I just don't.
Okay, so I'm going to keep going with the questions, but we do have Joe Siciliano and Dan Watson here tonight to answer some of these questions. But why don't I go to Michael Joseph? He was next.
Yeah, I don't want to. I'm sensitive to Karen's point about we're spending an awful lot of time on fields and carnivals, and there are other things to talk about. But it is. I think Joe and Karen Kowalski are both right. I think there's a middle ground here. I think on the first part. On the first part, it's not something that we should. It's not something that we should necessarily need to be getting involved in all the time. That said, I do think as far as the guidance of the board, it concerns me here. And I agree with Joe. It concerns me here that we're not. That it sounds like we haven't been as accommodating as we should be to an important community group. And my understanding of the history is that the 90 years comes from that, this carnival was a historic part of the community and a big thing that happened for a very long time. With the construction and everything over the last 10 years, they've moved away from the field and now they want to return it back to the traditional. Now that all the construction is done there, they want to turn it out of tradition. I'm frankly unsympathetic to the argument that we have to protect the grass. I mean, that's not what the grass is for. I mean, I get it; it's new grass and things like that. But there were ways that we just need to get the yes, and saying it's just blanket saying no to a community that clearly is very passionate about this. You look at our emails today because we're concerned about the grass. When that wasn't the concern a month ago. A month ago was apparently the wells, and then we came back with a different answer. It concerns me, and I think the answer, to much to Joe's point here, the guidance that we need to give from the board is that how do we get the yes here? How can we support this carnival to the extent that we can? The one engineering report that came to us suggested that pitching tent holes isn't a good idea, but everything else would be fine. Maybe that's the case. I don't think we need to hold community groups responsible or certainly charge, say, hey, if you pay for irrigation, we'll let you do this. I don't think we need to go that far. But I do think having these kind of conversations of where we can get the yes is the orientation and the guidance that we should be having as the board. Particularly when we're talking about these traditions that clearly have been central to this community for so many years. The only thing I will disagree with Mr. Kelly about, as my fellow Paisan, I do have it on very good authority that the pizza frite at the St. Catherine's Fair is much better. But other than that, I think we need to move forward.
Okay, Ms. Costin.
Well, there's a lot that just was said, but my kids are prolific carnival attenders, and I think that the pizza frite is equally good on both sides of town. No favorites, they're all good. Look, what concerns me is the way that this has sort of unfolded before us. There has been clearly some dialogue going on for a while that I am unaware of. But be that as it may, if a group is told no, and they've been furnished with a memo that explains why the answer is no, and they want to get to a yes, I can understand that. If there's compromise, I can work with that. If we're telling them not to put heavy carnival equipment down, and that's our best case scenario, to have an event there, I think that should be a reasonable starting point. As a Glenville parent before a North Street parent, we had field limitations at Glenville. We've had to move things inside. We've had to move things outside due to weather. We've had to move them onto the blacktop if the field was too soupy, but we made do with all sorts of inflatables and trampoline apparatuses. Other schools do giant laser tag obstacle courses, climbing walls. We just had pony rides at North Street for the Girl Scouts. So I think that there's a lot you can do within certain parameters. Is that a compromise that would appeal? I don't know. There's another field nearby. Cristiano Field is right nearby the church. I lived across the street from St. Roch's Place. I, lived on Glen Street. So I'm familiar with the geography, but I also want to echo Karen Kowalski's point that, the board does not issue facility use decisions, and we have to trust the people who are advising us. And if Dan Watson has concerns about the geothermal being damaged, I have to take that into consideration. If Joe Siciliano, who's charged his department with the care and maintenance of the fields, and he doesn't think it's a good idea, I gotta listen. So, while I want to get to a yes for this community, I think that there's got to be a compromise. And if it's not heavy motorized equipment on the field, then that's, a starting point for getting to a yes. But what worries me is if the answer is no, and you want to get to a yes, there are certain ways you do it. And right now, it feels a little adversarial. So I just want to put that out there. Joe Siciliano are free to chime in on, look, I don't want to see it geothermal well damaged. I don't want to see any of the piping underneath the field damaged. I want our kids to have a field, and the students are our stakeholders. They're the ones we have to consider when they need their field. It's important.
Sounds good. Let me go to Cody, and then I'm going to see if Joe and Dan want to say anything. So go ahead, Cody.
Sure, yeah. Some days on this board, I think to myself, oh, why am I doing this? This is so boring. And then every now and then things come up where you go, finally something to get involved and be on the right side here. So I think just a few quick points. One, people have talked about the process. Joe forwarded a very thoughtful email on April 14th to the entire board that flagged this. So I think this has been on our radar for quite some time with all of the detail that I'm aware of that exists. So, that was a few months ago. I think that to Karen's point about why this is coming up, Karen Kowalski's point about why this is coming up now, I think the policies that she cited say that if the administration won't approve something, that the board can actually then step in and approve something. And whether they've officially not approved it or not, I think de facto it hasn't been approved because this has been lingering for a reasonable amount of time. So it seems like a reasonable issue for us to evaluate and potentially provide approval for. I think it's important to note that I don't fault any of the administrators for not approving this. I think that the incentives and constraints that they face are very different from what we face, in that there's a very, if anything goes wrong, they get fully blamed. And if anything goes right, no one even remembers. And so, whereas we're in a position where we can look at this and say, this makes a lot of sense. I went to the field today in the rain to see it for myself. There is no grass there. It's entirely weeds. The field is a total disaster. The baseball field can't be used because some tree person said that they couldn't move a tree that, then didn't allow them to put a baseball diamond in. It's the idea that somehow we are going to disrupt the weeds on that field, or that damage things that are 5 feet below the ground when there's never been actually a request to put stakes 5 feet into the ground for this poor community that's been trying to use something that everybody wants to use. I mean, I think the one thing that everyone should reflect on is there are nice, good people that are sitting in different departments that have kept the Western fields closed for 7 years, and they've kept it closed because they've operated exactly the same way that some people on this call are suggesting we operate. Let's not make a decision. Let's do a risk report. Let's make sure that nothing could possibly ever go wrong when we're talking about putting things on tops of piles of dirt, on top of a geothermal system that's built to withstand earthquakes that an engineering firm has looked at and said is fine to have stuff on. So I think we can relieve the administrators here of a difficult position that they've been put in, which is, hey, sign off on something where there's nothing but downside for you. We should relieve them of that and say, this is an okay use, assuming that you meet the guidance for field usage. So if you can't, dig into the ground, you can't dig into the ground. If you need to have, which we require already, insurance or anything else, make those requirements. But this is the idea of just saying no perpetually or delaying, or, oh, we need to continuously evaluate the dirt is it's just creating, we're putting ourselves on the wrong side of what we've been experiencing with Western. So I hope that this is something that becomes an action item and that we are able to, give back to this community what is something that was theirs long before any of us even existed.
Okay, Christina, do you want to go? You want me to have Joe Siciliano go first? Up to you.
It's whatever you think makes sense.
Oh, why don't
Maybe
you
it's better
close
if
it out?
all the board members, yeah.
Yeah, no, so why don't you go?
Okay, I'm gonna start with, I do love a good carnival and my pizza fritta and my Italian, my maiden name's Samponia, so I'm all in on carnivals. But I think Laura Costin articulated a lot of the points beautifully. But like Karen Kowalski, I'm extremely worried about the process here. My concern is that, the administration makes a decision, people don't like the decision, and they don't follow the process. If we're saying we have a process in our policies, and instead there's every time someone wants to use our fields or use our facilities and isn't happy with the answer they're given, it then comes to the board. And again, like Karen Kowalski said, this is an operating decision. It should be in the administration. So I'm deeply concerned about the process of how this has gone. That being said, I think then we have kind of the process and then kind of what is our role. Our role as the board is to protect our asset. I would love to find, in my heart, I want to find a way for them to use it, but I don't have the comfort that we would have that. I think Karen Hirsch's suggestion for a new engineering study, if we could find the money for that, to basically, that could solve this issue going forward on a long-term basis. And perhaps that's the best long-term solution about what can and cannot be done on the field, both in terms of the geothermal and the grass, because we really have two issues on the field. I haven't walked the field and checked the weeds like Cody said, but I think I think that bears some thought. Because if Dr. Jones takes that and wants to do that, it's her prerogative. But I do think we're in a danger of micromanaging. I understand we want to be receptive to the community. But I also feel like we're being pushed into an urgency here when they've had an alternate location for a number of years. And now all of a sudden, like, we have a gun to our head, right? You know, getting the money to put the grass in the field, the 400,000 4 years ago was a monumental task with the BET and the RTM. You know, I think we all have to be cognizant. Yes, we've put a lot of money into this field and we've had issues with the tree warden. And I think back to protecting our assets, I think we don't want to make any decision that we're going to regret down the road for whatever reason. So I think we don't have information. I don't like the way this process has gone, personally. So if the solution is a study, I think I definitely could wrap my head around it. It's not really on for an action item. I don't know if we want to hear from Joe Siciliano, but I guess let me just see if there was anything else in my notes. Anyway, so I agree with what a lot of the things that were said, but I do think we have to kind of be cognizant of what our role is here and process. Thanks.
Well, since we made Joe come out tonight, Joe, would you like to say something? Dan, Joe, however you both want to give us some of your thoughts.
Joe is just texted me. He's trying to get on. I don't know if you need to give him.
He's there.
authorization.
He just has
That's
on
what-
mute. I see him on the
Okay.
panel.
I don't know. I just got a text. He says he can't talk. So, Joe, if you can hear me, if you touch the top of the screen,
There you
should
go.
be able.
You just unmuted for a second, Joe. Try it again.
Thank
There
you
you
for
go.
letting me, thank you for just letting me in.
Here you are.
I wasn't in the webinar, so
Oh, got it.
now I'm here.
Awesome. All right, Joe, why don't you, were you able to hear our whole conversation? Can you give us a little bit of your thoughts?
Well, yes, I can give you some thoughts. And I did hear all of your conversation, so thank you. I can tell you that I attended 65 of the 91 fairs at Hamilton Avenue. I grew up there. My parents were 40-year volunteers at the festival for 40 years. I grew up on Hamilton, playing on Hamilton Ave School Field. The issue is really true, is what you're talking about. There are two. There's the issue about the wells, and then there's the issue about the turf and establishing better turf. When the field was renovated and completed, we knew it would be a challenge to continue that establishing of the turf because of the soil content. We had to get a approved soil from the state of Connecticut and tested so that we can put it on the playing field. And of course, that type of soil does not have a lot of organic material in it, which doesn't really help with the nurturing of grass. Also, the problem with no irrigation. We have, as you've heard, we've applied 3 different types of applications and since August of 2021, aeration, overseeding, organic fertilizer over the last 11 months to try to get the turf to establish. Our turf manager, Tim Coughlin, has told me today that we only have a root penetration of about 3 inches, which is not a really substantial penetration for a root system, and is susceptible to damage and or burning in the sun, heat with and when equipment sits on it. So we are concerned about this. The only goal I have is to try to provide the best surface for the Hamilton Avenue School children and the Hamilton Avenue community and other sports users. And I will say this, and I mean this, if this request was coming to my department for use of a park field, my answer would be 100% no, not on an athletic surface. So I'm pretty committed to trying to, move the project forward of improving fields. Kathleen, you sat on the field committee study. One of the obvious things that came across in that study in the dialogue was that Greenwich needs to continue to improve the maintenance process that they have, and we need to manage the overuse and misuse of our fields. And And that means how we manage, sports programs and other activities that go on them. So we clearly understand what the challenge is, and our goal is to keep moving forward. Other than that, it is a Board of Education item and their decision. And we can provide any information to Dan or to Tony that the BOE might need to help them with their decision of the determination of whether this can happen or not. That's all. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe. And you do remind me about our field studies. The other thing we learned from that is we never have enough fields, and there will be a lot of fields out of commission this
Kathleen,
summer.
One other
Kathleen,
thing, because I think this
point
needs to
for
be
you.
clear.
Sorry.
Just
go
as a
ahead.
point,
Go ahead, Joe.
just as a point of order, for the public, we should make clear Joe's role.
Oh, excuse me. I'm the Director of Parks and Recreation. Thank you.
Good point. Go ahead, Joe.
I'm not just a private citizen and a taxpayer, but one other thing is that up until about 12, 15 years ago, it was true that on the carnival was held on the parking lot, and the apron around the back of the school, there was a big asphalt apron, and the forward section of the field. Okay, I was a kid, we attended this, okay? And during the field construction, or the building construction, excuse me, we actually offered the church the opportunity to move their carnival to Roger Sherwin Baldwin Park. We do have a turf surface down there. It is not an athletic field. We do allow events like this, concerts and et cetera, on that field. We did allow them to go down there and use the field. Obviously, it's a better opportunity for the church. It's a community in their community. And since then, they've been using the split field. I mean, they use the parking deck for soft items such as, food and a raffle and those kinds of things. They use their property across the street at the the St. Roch School, asphalt area behind the old school for rides, and across the street from Hamilton Avenue School for rides. It's not the best layout, but it has been adequate, and I assume that the church has made some money in all of those years that they've had the fair with a split opportunity like that. I'm not against the church issue. I'm a member there. I mean, my family's been there for 100 years. What I'm really trying to say is that I'm just want to improve the fields. I'm in favor of improving fields and what's good for the Ham Ave community and the students and our field users. So that's really all I have to say.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks for coming. Dan, did you want to add anything to the conversation before we wrap it up?
Yeah, the only thing that I want to say is, and I'm not against the church. My mother is the president of the Altar and Rosary Society of Our Lady of Sorrows in Vestal, New York. Okay. It's got nothing to do with that. And there was conversations by one of you folks that said I had an issue with the engineer. I don't know anybody from Thornton Tomasetti. So I'm just putting it out there. I've been charged with providing a clean, safe learning environment for the 4,000 kids in Greenwich. And I have to tell you folks the issues that we're having with the school so that we can provide some capital improvement and some operational issues. So when I first got on board, one of the things I was charged with was leveling the field at Hamilton Avenue. When I first went down there, I thought, this is nuts. The field was too small to level, but I was assured by some community members there that this had to be done for the community. So then I had the charge of going out in front of various organizations that we all know about and getting the money to level this field. I don't want to do it again. I don't want to go in front of those people and say, well, we spent $500,000, but guess what? We got to ask for some more money to fix the field. Whatever the case is. That's my beef. That's the only beef I have. The issue with the geothermal wells, I wasn't here when it was put in. All I have to go by is this letter from the previous superintendent. Now, there had to have been a reason for that letter to have been written. If something's happened over the last 12 years that changed the reason where this letter was written, somebody's got to tell me. I'll abide by it. I have no issues, but I'm certainly not going to say, yeah, go ahead and do it. And then the fingers point this way. It's not worth it. $500,000 is $500,000. So somebody bigger than me has got to make the decision. I'll stand by it. I'll do what I need to do. But I think this is an issue for somebody to talk in a back room and figure it out. This is not an issue for us. Sorry.
Okay, I see a couple more hands and I do want to get to Central Middle School yet, but so Cody.
I wanted to thank Joe and Dan for their comments. I think it is instructive that, to my point before, I think it's unfair to put the burden of decision on them, as it's not their job. Their job is to do what they can for students, as they highlighted. I also would point out that when the feedback was given to the church folks about the concerns over the 2009 report, what they did was they went and actually had an engineer evaluate the available materials and reports and provide an opinion, which is my understanding is the latest engineering opinion on the subject, which made it very clear. So I would maybe disagree with Dan that all he has to go off of is a 2009 memo. We have more information than that. And I think the information is pretty clear. All of the folks on this call have that memo. And I know that Brad Camillo has also reviewed it and submitted it or whatever as to be on the record. So yeah, I think just going back to the main point, this is a great thing for us to, we should take the burden off of Dan and Joe. It should not be their responsibility for people to blame them for something. And I don't think they have to worry about the financial side of it either, because this will be an insured event. So, I think you put the right instructions in place, you get the, if an insurer is willing to underwrite the financial risk, then, Dan can probably be comfortable with it. We have clear guidelines. Here's what you have to do. Here's what you're responsible for if anything goes wrong. And these are the very people whose kids go to the school. I mean, it's just, I think that hopefully this has been illuminating for everyone else, because I think this one's pretty clear.
Joe, you had your hand up again. Did you mean it? But then it went down. Did you want to talk again or? Go ahead.
No, thank you. I think Dan covered it. Thank you.
Okay, Karen Hirsch.
Well, I can't jump in on the pizza free issue because I've yet to find a gluten-free one, but I can way back in the discussion we're having, which is the exact point I started with. First, Karen Kowalski better presented my discussion, which is we have policies, procedures, and regulations. We have an entire detailed information as to how you apply to use our facilities and what needs to be provided. But I will still go back to the fact that there is a lack of information and missing materials and documents that were what that 2009 discussion was based on. We have stuff from 2019 when our fields, the soil was tested at Hamilton Avenue and the fields were leveled. We did spend over, close to $500,000 to get that done. And it really, as Dan pointed out, was a long process to get the approval for the financials for that. And I, much like both Cody and Joe, I think Michael Joseph has said the same thing. And Christine, I think we want to get from no to a yes in some way. That doesn't necessarily, and Ms. Downey also said it's true. Like, I know that we feel that there might be a time pressure for this. It's not something that should be coming to the board. But I would say, irregardless of the yes or no for use of the field for this particular event, I think what it goes back to is our responsibility to make sure that that field is usable for the school and the students. There are questions as to how that field can be used. And we don't have the documentation from 2009 from behind that memo. The memo that was given to us by the church, it's all well and good, but nobody's been to the site to visit it. They're looking at old documents that somehow we don't have, but they might, I don't know. I would really ask that we consider, and this can be a discussion off, for the administration, whatever, that we have somebody come review the site to really see what it can and cannot be used for. If any of the changes in 2019, the leveling of the field has changed that. I know the geothermal field is more than about half of the field. It wasn't down as far as it should be based on the fact that there's rock under that soil. But I really do feel that, the the memo that was given to us was not requested by us, was not requested by the town, and we don't have the data and the documentation to go behind it. And I think it's our asset. We should have that. If we can, it gives us a more opportunity available for the school and the PTA to use that site, for outside entities as well. And I think it would give, possibly for Dan and for Joe, more assurance as to what we can and can't do, and community. That's just my opinion. I really think we need a risk management assessment and somebody to review the site. Having somebody just look at old documents and give a new viewpoint to me is not substantial enough to give me that assurance, but it really shouldn't be up to us as a board to say yes or no. It really is an administrative sort of decision. But since it's put here, the question isn't about who can and can't use it, it's the why. So can we solve the why by looking back at that field? It seems like it's the right time to do so. Just, in the meanwhile, there's another town field just down the street that could possibly be used for this year. I forgot the name of the field. I was out on, nope, Joe's shaking his head. No, I'm sure there's reasons why. I was out on the Hamilton Avenue field this morning with Joe and Cody in the cold rain. I walked to all the other fields in the area, spent a lot of time, trying to do research on this today. So that was why I'm making the suggestion that maybe we do a site review and risk assessment management, whatever it's called. But
Karen, I get that, and that's been the second time somebody said that to me about using the field. I just said in my statement that if this were to come to me in a field that I would have charge over in my inventory, I would 100% no. So, it has the same problems. It doesn't have the well problem, it has the turf problem. There are parking problems. There's a whole bunch of other things that go on down at Line Avenue. But yeah, I mean, I'm not anti, events, but at the end of the day, not on athletic surface fields. That's kind of where we're going to have to go in order to improve the conditions.
well, again, that may be so for this year. We're looking to build roots in the community and with our grass. But the question again is, we have two different competing documents. One is ours, but we don't have the backup material for it. One was given to us by an outside entity. I think that's where the confusion comes, that, outside entities are asking why the 2009 decision was made to not be able to use it. And that's what I'm saying. I think if we have that answer, it gives us, and the community that understanding, but it's also so our school can have access to those fields in a different way if possible. And if the answer is yes, if the answer is no, then we all abide by that. That's just again, my thoughts.
I had to just step out to say goodbye to my parents, who, by the way, goes by Nona and Papa, so that we could all also know that there's Italian lineage here. Laura Costin.
So I called the company that put in the geothermal today. They were very waffly. They would not put anything in writing to give to us. I think that that would have been helpful if they would have, because while we do have the memo from the church, again, that's an outside entity that we did not contract with, and it's not within our general purview to accept those kinds of explanations. But I think that not having any kind of documentation, as Karen said, that would shed some light on the actual limitations. It's really hard to sort of to get any further on this, any clarity on this one. I just don't see how that's possible without having somebody else that the board has contracted to get a better understanding of what's beneath the ground, where the vulnerabilities might be. They said, you can't drive a stake, 12 inches into the ground. I don't know what it takes to secure a bouncy house. I have no idea. I think there's a lot of unknowns, and at this moment, I think, it's not an action item tonight. But again, if our facilities director and our Parks and Rec director are concerned, then, I'm concerned as well.
Okay, guys, I really want to try to wrap this up, because this was really meant to just be a discussion, just to make, like I said, it's become a community topic. But so Joe and Cody, can you make it fast?
Yeah, absolutely. I was
Always super
hoping,
fast.
I was hoping to sort of wrap it up, but Cody's got a little thing to put on.
Joe, can I make one comment and then you
Jump
can wrap
in,
it up?
please.
I was just gonna say, it's not like some random outside firm. It's the outside entity that the church's report came from is the geothermal design engineering firm that we hired to build the original system. And so the fact that they went and did that themselves is a good thing. And it's honestly, it's a shame the amount of time it would take us to actually go and commission a report and do all that stuff. Again, this will just be, we're right now the people that are on the other side of the Western thing. Like, we're those people, good people, thinking we're doing everything right and making things drag out way, way, way too long. Like, that's all I have to add. Joe, all yours.
Okay, I'll try to wrap it up unless Kathleen, of course, has something she'd like to conclude with. One thing I do want to say and make very clear is I'm very proud of everyone on this call with their civil discourse. I thought it was incredibly, we all didn't agree on this topic. We all had a wide variety of opinions, but it's a lesson to our society today, how we can discuss issues from different points of view and have really good civil discourse. So thank you for that. Suggestions on how we might be able to come to some sort of conclusions on this. And the conclusion, I understand might actually be no to the community, but this community needs to see that we have an appeal process in place. I suggested, or will suggest, that we have some sort of meeting with this community, some of our experts, possibly Joe and Dan, and a representative of the Board of Education, and maybe that the community, that it won't stop here if we tell them no this time, because they're going to try to ask us to change our decision next time around. If we could at least sit down, and if the answer is we have to wait till we get a report that some of my colleagues have suggested, then that'll be the suggestion. Our suggestion might be you can't put any stakes in the ground, but you can have children run around on the field. Well, maybe that would be the suggestion. But the point is, I think we still need to exercise an appeal process that gives the community the satisfaction that we at least heard them, and then we can elect to say, okay, these are your restrictions. If it doesn't make it usable for you, then fine. I would certainly be willing to volunteer my time to represent the Board of Education, or if Kathleen feels somebody else would be better suited, I would support that as well. But bringing people together in a conversation, so at least they understand they're heard and they understand what our restrictions are and why they're in place, I think would be a solution to could be a solution to our dilemma.
Okay, we have lots of different ideas. Hard for me to pull them all together when I'm trying to think about the CMS and graduation tomorrow, which I feel ill-prepared for. So I'm happy that we had the discussion, even though I understand there was questions as to why it was on the agenda, but it seems like, to your point, Joe, it was fruitful. And I think it was great. Thank you, Joe Siciliano and Dan Watson, for spending time with us this evening and giving us a little bit more information. That was also greatly appreciated. So let's move on to our next item and figure this out. Okay, so with that, I am going to wrap this one up and move to Central Middle School Ed Specs. Dr. Jones.
First of all, I know our consultants are on with us tonight, and Tom Healy. So I do want to apologize. I don't think when we set this meeting, we anticipated that they were going to be on for so long before we got to the item. So thank you for your patience. I know I'm going to turn it right over. I know Roger was working and provided the document about the different sizes. So if they are still there, I'll turn it over to them.
Hello, everyone. Yeah, we're still here. Chris, myself, and Fran talked earlier, and from the last Board of Ed meeting, we took our assignment, and Fran and I and Tom Healy met a number of times and discussed the different options about how different parts and elements of the school would have to change based on the student enrollment. So I think, pretty sure we understood correctly, the assignment really was to look at the school at 660, 720, and 780. So based on that, I've got my chart here. I'll pull it up a little bit in front of me. Based on that, we came up with a revised program for each school. And on the chart, if you have it, I think you see that we put the 511 students as like the baseline. And so that gave, there you go. Okay. So that was the baseline. And then we said if 660 students, what would change? And we knew we had to add some additional classrooms at that point. We figured out how many and what they would service. And we went through each category within the ed spec, and that's what shows up at the top: classroom, special education, administration, guidance, on, so down to the end. One that doesn't show up there, and I think it's because the didn't fit on the copier, it doesn't show after custodial, there's building services. Building services was a combination of core building requirements and circulation. As you increase program spaces, additional circulation space has to be added as well. So because you have more students and they have more movement through hallways and everything grows. So I think you can see on the chart that at 660, the overall, and again, it doesn't show it on that chart, but what it shows is that the school went from 104,200 to 114,748. And that included everything in the 511 enrollment, and the areas that are highlighted in green show where those areas grew based on programmatically what Tom, Fran, and I decided had to be included or had to be added to it. Excuse me. That same process holds true up to 720, but when we hit 720, you notice a lot more green showed up, and it was because we noticed the number grew considerably. And what I think what happened, our take on it was really we hit a tipping point, and the whole concept of how the school how the teams were developed increased by a whole team. So instead of 2 teams, it went to 3 teams, which made a whole lot more classrooms. I think we went from 30 to 39. Science had to be increased, and then a new art room, and it just many more things were added, and then all of that, along with the building services increase, we got to 136,000. At 780, there was another increase, and a couple more things were impacted by it. We boosted custodial a little bit, and also career and technology rooms got increased. And you ended up with 140,000. I think that number is probably still shy because we just did not have enough time to go back and talk through some of the guidance stuff. We know that there might be an additional psychologist or an additional social worker. The administration area might have to be enlarged if there's another receptionist, because now all of a sudden went from your 511 students up to 780. So depending on how that impacts some of those other areas, even the kitchen might have to get larger. We just don't know right now. We'd have to do a little more study on that. But at a minimum, it would hit 140,000. Probably in all likelihood would probably be up close to 142, 143 by the time we were done. So that being said, we're here to answer any questions you might have.
Great. Thank you so much for putting it in this format. I know this is exactly what we asked for, and it's greatly appreciated. And I was jokingly, I think, said to my caucus, I know after spending a lot of times in Excel, this looks easy when you have one page, but I know this was a lot of work. So
thank you.
Greatly appreciated. So I think I'm going to get everyone in order. I think Michael, Joseph, Mercanti, Anthony, your hand was up first.
Woohoo! I appreciate you. Thank you, Kathleen. Thanks for putting this together. I had some clarifying questions, which hopefully could help us. So on the classroom column, are you able to tell us, so what's the difference classroom wise? So when you go from 511 to 660, how they go, or from 660 to 720, how many additional classrooms are we looking at there?
So when you went from 511 to
I think it's 511 to 660, there were 3 additional regular classrooms.
Yes, there are. Am I on mute here? Hang on.
No, you're not on mute.
Okay, yeah, there was three additional classrooms. Then there's another, within the school, there's spaces called either flex space or elective learning areas. And those are areas that don't have a defined use necessarily for one teacher. But they're areas that get quite a bit of use and they're needed to handle different functions, educational functions that occur. So we did everything that was in the 511. We had to add 3 classrooms, 1 flex space, 1 elective learning classroom, and then the media center grew by a pretty significant amount, and the cafeteria.
So, but classroom wise, so 511 to 660 is 3 additional classrooms, a flex space, and a half class. Is that what you said?
Elective
No,
learning.
flex class.
Elective, flex space, and elective learning. So what's that? What does that mean, elective learning?
So
So
Tom,
for
I'm gonna
exa-
let you answer that one.
Fran, you could jump into, I heard you speaking up as well, but basically I think we're talking about the elective classes. So the areas of the, or exploratory classes, your arts, your technology, things like that.
So a 4th classroom.
No, what would happen is with 660, you would need 12 elective learning spaces at one time. So we would need, and we had 11 at that point, we would need an additional elective space. So, when you count up your gym, your art, your music, your family consumer science, your health, all of those combined, we had 11. We would have to add 1 to go from 511 to 660. We needed 1 more elective learning space, because if you're scheduling 660 students, you need 12 in order in one period. You need 12 spaces for elective learning. So we would need 1 additional space.
Okay. And then when we're talking about teams, so the additional team comes in at 720. That's
For each grade level, correct. So
For each grade level.
So 6th grade would have an additional team, 7th as well as 8th.
Okay. And how many, Mr. Haley, how many teams would that make?
3 teams per grade level.
Yeah, so actually, when we talked this through, it actually worked out, I think, fairly well, because coming back this way, it almost looks like we've set sort of the 2 proposals on the table from 660 to 720, because it seemed like 720 became this tipping point where the building grew much more, because we realized when we're building, not necessarily for efficiency, but for actual flow and comfortability in the way that we want to operate the building, that would be the right time. So in essence, that 720, the discussion Fran, Roger, and I had was that would really be the point where we would flip to a 3rd team per grade level, which opens up a whole new set of classrooms. Now, those would be small teams at 720 though. So it does give you room to grow, but that's sort of why we stopped at that point too. And we just started looking at 780, because really 720 became this tipping point.
Okay. And then between 511 and 660, there's no increase in special ed. I know last week or last time we talked about the potential of bringing an additional program online eventually to help some of the students that we now have to send out for programs, having that program here. I'm assuming 590 doesn't give us that capacity. We said they might have that capacity. I think Dr. Jones said we might have that capacity later on, but I'm assuming that wouldn't happen at 660 under these current parameters. Is that fair to say?
We didn't put that in for 660. So basically what we did is we took the percentage, the typical percentage of special ed students for 660 students at a middle school, and we could accommodate that number based on the number of spaces that we allowed and the number of teachers and spaces allowed for each grade level and each team. We were fine at that point at 660. When it changed was when we went to 720.
Okay. Well, and I know I'm asking a lot of questions. Hopefully these are clarifying for everybody. There's just one more, because I know we've talked about a range. These numbers aren't exact. So is there any sense like 660 comfortably, what is that? Is that comfortably 680 to, or is that, what would be the comfort level?
The upper limit?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think when we were talking about it, we felt that even though the school was, we went through the program and locked in at 660, we understood that the way, how many students would be in a classroom, there was probably room in there for another 30 or 40 students max, if it came to that. And if you hit that 40, for whatever reason, a bubble comes through and then all of a sudden, you've got that bump in your enrollment, it would be uncomfortable to go beyond the 40. That's when you'd start to really feel squeezed, and a lot of the problems that you would have through normal overcrowding would start to occur.
Cool.
It wouldn't happen at 661 is I guess what I'm saying. Okay.
Okay. Sorry, who switched around? Christina Downey, there had been someone before you, but now they're gone. Who was it? Was it Karen Hirsch?
I don't.
Okay. I think
Yes, but Cody, Michael Joseph asked my questions so far. I have a few others, but I'll wait.
Okay. This is for you guys. I know you said there's something in the notes here about square footage per student was done at 204 per student. However, here's my question. On the 660 and the 720, those don't translate to 204 square feet per student. So I'm just trying to understand. I mean, I'm okay with it. I'm just trying to understand it. And was that what you were saying before? I just want to be sure I'm clear in my understanding.
Yeah. So I think it changes. What it isn't a straight line formula or function. Okay. So what happens is there's a dynamic going on. And just even by the fact that they teach in teams, we were watching how classroom sizes, even though we increased the enrollment, but because we had a different array of classrooms, all of a sudden the amounts of students per classroom actually went down in some areas. So, and then for example, the cafeteria, it really isn't based on the overall student population, it's based on the wave population, because there's 3 waves. So in some senses, a wave becomes larger in one phase, and then when the school expands, it can actually shrink again, believe it or not. So it's hard to explain, but it's not a straight line function.
Okay, so don't get hooked into this 204.
Yeah, and I think the
square foot per student.
204 number might have been what was developed at the 511.
Okay, no, which is fine, because frankly, because this kind of goes a little bit to the state reimbursement question, because I think you guys have said that it's 168 per student.
That's correct.
Because based on the square footage that you have, we would only be at $174 per student at that 660 number of 114,748 students. Now, I guess the problem is we can't prove it to the state, but I guess that's a separate issue. Okay, that's fine. I just want to understand it. Because I'm just going to jump in, Kathleen. I know we're asking questions because guys, it seems to me that targeting the 660 calculation is the really logical choice, just because it gives us the space that I think we all would feel much more comfortable with, without necessarily feeling that we've overbuilt this building in the short term. I know we've all talked about, I know we have these 8-year projections, but those are the lowest enrollment numbers that we've seen in the last 20 years. So we've all agreed that that's not the right way to approach this project. But if in 50 years, we're sitting kind of where we've been historically, to me, the 115,000 square foot number, to me, feels right, just because we've only really upped the number of classrooms, the media room, and the cafeteria and the circulation space. The rest of the items have stayed pretty, I think, pretty level from where we were at 511. So that's just kind of my initial takeaway. So I'll yield to someone else.
Okay, Karen Kowalski.
So, sorry, I'm a little unprepared on the question just because I was looking for the numbers in front of me, but I don't disagree with any of this conversation, but I'm just going to throw it out there to kind of put any myths aside or put an end to a line of questioning concerning the size of the school as it relates to what we've seen in the past. So I think at one point we've seen Central Middle School, and Tom, I don't know if you're able to answer this because I think this might predate you, but I guess my question goes to the current size of the school at some point had as many as, I think, 711 kids. I think that number sits out at me.
No, it was 730 in
it was
2002.
In 730. So here's where I'm going with this. We manage 730 kids in the current size school that we have. And so my question is, we're looking to expand the school bigger, I'll just, without adjectives, bigger, to something of which would accommodate allegedly 720 kids. So why, here's the $100 million question. It's, why do we need a bigger school for the 720 kids now when we managed to educate kids with the same size, with the current size school in 2002 with 760 kids?
I can try to start to tackle that, I guess. It did predate me. But I think the idea there is kind of almost in the way you asked the question. You know, you can manage to educate kids in any building.
Okay.
It doesn't make it an ideal learning environment. So I think when you're looking at a building of this size with that amount of students, you're looking at using every single available space, almost every single period of every single day. So you really are putting a lot of pressure sort of on the way you build your schedule, the way students move about the building. Teachers don't have their own rooms. People are sharing rooms. You put your world language teacher in 4 different classrooms. You put your art on a cart and they go down the hall and they try to teach here, there, and everywhere. So it's all possible, right? And it's funny because Fran and Roger and I are having these conversations, and when we hit that 720 mark, the number seemed so big to me. And so I already started to back off and start saying, well, I could have this person share that room and that person do this. And Fran was like, but that's not the way you want to do it when you're sort of designing at the beginning. You want to design for a fully functioning building. So I think to answer your question, there's a couple things, and Roger could probably speak to it a little bit more eloquently to me in terms of the square footage size and expectation of buildings now for learning. I think you also have the way learning has adapted. It's become much more collaborative. It's become much more flexible in the way we expect to deliver instruction now, which you need a bit more open spaces and mobility around areas. And then I think that, when you're looking at this process versus the other, you were putting the big bubble of kids into a building that already existed. Now we're looking to design a building for a potential amount of kids that are coming through, and we're trying to maximize, I think, what we could offer them coming to that size building. So I think that's sort of why, like I said, if whatever number you end at any given year, once you bump up against that size, you're always going to be able to find efficiencies. And so, yes, the larger building is going to look a little bit more flexible with open spaces, but those could always be used for, whatever needed to be used. But then when you hit that bubble, that's when you're going to start to find efficiencies and move people around. So I think hopefully that was at least partly what you were looking for in terms of an answer.
No, it is. And now I'm going to pull a Joe and kind of sum it up for the big picture, which is, so what I think you're telling me is that we in 2002, we managed it and it was not ideal. And that it's tough to operate in that scenario because you have art on a cart. You have teachers moving around in multiple different spaces. They don't have their own home, so to speak, where they can see kids in their room and in their own environment with their own resources. So you've got teachers trucking around with their little cubbies down the hallways, which is already ends up being fairly crowded. And the ideal to create this bigger space allows for this collaborative style teaching, which has evolved over the years. Who knows what kind of style teaching will be in 20 years from now or even 80 years from now. But I think we can all assume that it's not going to go back to the way we learned 20 years ago, and we were in a lying desk row after row, and it was very regimented. Okay, so I got my answer. Thanks, Tom. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Karen. Cody?
Yeah, sure. Just to, well, thinking about the right size here, I think 780 doesn't make sense. I think this chart really helps explain why. I actually, when I think about the 720 size, I'm intrigued by a few things. I talked to Tom earlier today about just trying to understand the educational needs, and relates to Karen's question of where you start making trade-offs. I just think it's worth pointing out that it's, when I do kind of the lazy math in my head, it's probably almost 20,000 square feet bigger, the 720 versus 660. And so, that's going to cost you $10 to $15 million more. And if you think about this building will be in use for, 50 to 100 years, let's say 75, 80 years, you're talking about effectively a cost increase of like 120 grand a year. Like if you amortize it over the life of that, it's not entirely accurate because you have a cost of capital and stuff. But what I was thinking about is, that is obviously built to suit peak enrollment levels that we've seen before. And I actually think that we probably will be in excess of probably somewhere around, usually these things lag on 30-year cycles. So if you peak in 2002, your next peak is, maybe in the late 2030s or something. But we also have a lot of building that's scheduled to happen in the, central district. And then also the last thing I wanted to flag, just for people to think about, is we have had a number of instances, even recently, where schools become unavailable for various reasons. Central is kind of a unique thing in that it's central. It's the most centrally located area. We right now don't have places to put students when something unexpected happens, and you can always expect something unexpected is going to happen. So there's probably some value, even when we're not at 730 students in the school, of having extra rooms available where you can say, oh, hey, something goes wrong in X building and the kids aren't there, and instead of putting them in a trailer or something, like there's 3 extra rooms, you can move a grade or 2 grades over into Central for a period. And I think that's something that's, more unique for Central than Eastern or Western. And then finally, we should remember too, Eastern and Western are both at like peak enrollment right now and kind of bursting at the seams. And so it's probably not bad to have a little extra capacity somewhere in the network, especially because we might be able to offset future capital expenditure needs in the other middle schools by having, some kind of optional enrollment program or something to just move enrollment over. So those are some of the things on my mind. I was probably leaning more towards the 720 over the 660 because of the incremental cost relative to some of those benefits I mentioned, but I think it's probably one of those two.
Thank you. Karen Hirsch?
Sorry, I had to move from taking minutes to open my mic, but I think, I'm similarly minded to sort of where Cody is. I'm going to use some fun isms. If you build it, they will come. And no one expects the Spanish Inquisition. So that one's famous from Monty Python. It's, we have to expect the unexpected. And I'm going to harken back to the days of Glenville. We looked at the highest enrollment that it ever seen, and we were told, when it's a shame that Mr. D'Amico is not here, because he could certainly speak to that. I know we very much argued for building for larger in case, movement occurred. We asked to have a possibility of a second story, that it wasn't built out just in case it was needed for something. And there was a concern, and we were told it was not prudent to do that. We would never reach the size of X. Well, within 2 years of that school being built, we reached that size and outgrew the space. Central is centrally located. I've looked at enrollment projections backwards and forwards. We've reached the mid seven, low to mid sevens on, more than one occasion. And, we are, as, Cody mentions, having a lot of new buildings going up in the central area. Should 20, and I'm not talking about changing lines now, but in 20, 30 years, when we have more students, when there are, we may need to move lines, or someone in the future might, and you can't expand outwards because we don't have that much expansion. You'd shift to the side or more towards the middle, and it makes more sense for us to be thoughtful now and to think 20, 30 years down the road if there does need to be some kind of change. It's not, if it were me, I'd probably hit right at 700, but to me, I think 720 seems more realistic. I think it's also really hard, and Joe didn't mention this tonight, but he mentioned it at our last meeting, sort of having a projection. It's hard to take these numbers and see realistically what that would look like on the space that we have. I think that's the only holdup I have in that regards. But I definitely think it is better to, if we're starting, we've never had to really start from scratch except for maybe New Lebanon. This is our opportunity to do so. This would be the first middle school that we'll be doing this with. And I really do think that it provides a lot more opportunity for us to give to our students what they don't have now, whether it is at Central, whether it's at Eastern or Western. This is going to be the basis for anything that we're going to be doing forward at the middle school. So that was sort of my thought. I looked at a bunch of similar middle schools throughout the state of Connecticut that have been built since the changes were made to requirements for the state. I think it was after Sandy Hook, and there were some other improvements put in. And so, these numbers and the sort of the way the spaces are laid out is more comparable to how those schools are done. So that was just another thought that I'm going to add.
Thanks. Michael Joseph.
Thanks. So, thank you. So let me just make sure we understand here, because if folks from are just tuning in this time, or they didn't paying attention to all of our conversations here, right? So these numbers didn't come out of the blue. So the 660, 720, 780 speak specifically to the increments that make sense in the current teaming structure. So if that's true, so if 660 is adding 3 core classrooms, we're going to have an imbalance there, right? Is that fair to say? I heard you say that 720 we had a whole nother team, but 660 we're going to have some teams that have larger classes, some teams that have more classrooms than other teams. Is that right?
So this could be a whole other conversation about scheduling and balance, right? So all of this is predicated on a completely equal distribution across teams and grade levels, which never really exists, right? So that's what makes it kind of tricky. So to answer your question, basically, I think the reason why it looks differently going from sort of 3 classrooms to an additional, I think it's like 12 or 15, is really when you get to 720, adding that third team, they would be very small teams. They would be teams of about 80 or so kids, again, if it's equally distributed. Whereas when you're at the 660 level, you're really talking about teams of 110. So those are pretty much what you look at when you're building a teaming structure as the 2 far ends of how big a team should really be. Because when it gets down to scheduling and you say, okay, I've got 110 students, I've got 5 or 6 teachers, depending upon your staffing model for that team, that then evenly breaks down to around 20 or so, 18 or so kids per class. So that's why we use those numbers, is because we're doing that. So then you're basically going from 660, which is sort of the high end of the teaming model. So yes, you would be stretched at that level, to then flipping at 720 to being on the exact opposite end, where you'd have a lot more free space until you grew into it. And also, if you didn't change your staffing model, your class sizes wouldn't necessarily get any smaller, right? You may still have the same average class size unless you're adding staff, but you may just have more open space throughout the day until it's filled with more kids, if that makes sense.
So there's a significant change in flexibility. That's fair to say.
Correct, exactly. And that was sort of what we tried to get at when we had this conversation, which is when we landed on it, it's, for me at least, it was an aha moment, right? I've never done this before. I'm trying to put myself in your shoes to make this kind of decision. And I'm saying, when Fran really, I think, was the one who brought it up, she said, that really seems to me like it's that tipping point where you want to add that third team. And then I said, really to get to 80 per team, that actually gives the board a good way to look at the 2 choices is how much additional space are you willing to go for based on where the numbers are. And it does really give you a lot of latitude at 720 that you don't get at 660. So at 660 going up to 680, as Roger said, that's going to put a lot of strain on the actual building at that size. Flipping to 720, it's almost the opposite.
Yeah. So for what it's worth, I think Cody might be onto something here with I kind of like the argument for 720 based on what you're saying. What we're hearing then, or what that would look like against specs, based from all those educational regions. It sounds like, and we talked about the possibility down the line. This isn't an ed spec conversation, but of magnet program or otherwise, other ways to make use of this space. It sounds like 720 might not be a bad idea to think about, in all honesty.
And so, sorry, I know I have another hand. I have a question. 720 then takes you to, because you were saying that's, you almost have like extra capacity within on the teaming model. So that 720 can go up to 770. Is that the right range to think about? What's the out?
Yeah. Again, it gets a little muddy once you start looking at imbalanced teams, but I would say, and maybe Roger, you have a better sense of this. The reason why we sort of paused at 780 was because we realized that once we flip to 720, there is more latitude there to build out almost up to probably close to 770 or so, maybe even 780 in that space.
So if you take a look at the differences between the 720 and the 780, right? There's really not much change. Not as much as you see with the 660 and the 720.
Right.
But part of the problem is that the 720 is structured around 3 teams.
Right, so that's the big change.
Right, but you won't be teaching 3 teams when the school's built necessarily. You might grow into 3 teams, but you're going to be opening and running the school for a while with 2 teams. So you would have a lot of latitude. Obviously, you'd have a lot of extra rooms. If you were using all the rooms, your class size would be down as low as 13 to 14 students per class. But if at the 2 team and you just use those and you just keep those rooms in as spare rooms, you'll move your occupancy level for classrooms probably up in the 16 to 18 range is what I'm thinking. Probably 18 is probably more realistic.
Right.
Because that'd be the 2-team model.
I just saw a lot of hands go up. I mean, it's if you were to build it for the next 5 years, 660 would be the answer.
Absolutely.
If you're building it though for 100 years, I'm thinking 2100, and which is like a no-brainer because we have buildings for longer than that, right? To Cody's back of the envelope math, it starts to make a lot of sense to see this as, a 720 building, especially, I know everyone keeps saying it, central location, and the fact that we already have Eastern and Western, Eastern's north of 800. If there is ever a time, and we wouldn't necessarily be redistricting, but who knows what happens in 2100, there might be a change. And this would be certainly the easiest school to make that change to, and the fact that the population will be hopefully growing again with a lot of housing going up. So I'm sort of falling in the 720 range, but I see a lot of hands. So in what order? I don't remember. Well, Tom Healy, you get to go first. Your hand's up then.
I just wanted to say something quickly to sort of clarify that point that Roger just made, because I wasn't sure if it was clear before. So again, if you're going with a larger building and we still are in the next 5 years and we're not even near that number, when you think of like sort of that operating cost of staffing, right, you're not increasing your staffing, right? So there are going to be more open rooms because we're not adding teachers and going to a 3rd team so that there's, a small 60-person team and we're just using rooms to use rooms. We're still using our same model. That would only be, we would be growing into that over the years as the enrollment increases, right? Because that's how my staffing gets increased and so on and so forth is with enrollment increases. So again, it does give you a lot of latitude over the short term, unless obviously other decisions are made. But when we would, if and when we grew to that number, the staffing would come to fill those rooms, to make those teams to go, so on and so forth. So that was, just wanted to make sure that was clear.
Understood. Okay, Joe.
Thank you. I have just a minor concern. One of my 4 brothers is a builder, and he's a good builder, but he's not a very good businessman. And he doesn't understand how to put a profit for negotiations onto a price. When he gives you a price, he picks a number. And then if you try to haggle the number down, he asks you, well, what are you willing to give up in order to bring the price down? So in this case here, we have a 660 at a 720. The people that will be funding or helping us pay for this, or making the decisions on paying for this, the 720 will cost more. The 660 will cost less. I believe what it might come down to, and this is a concern, if you build 660, you possibly can have a better building. If you build 720, you have to give something up to do that. That's a concern I have.
Okay. I see a lot of hands. Karen Hirsch.
Oh, well, I think in some regards, Principal Healy said what I was going to say, but it's with all this talk about a teaming model and having 2 teams, 2 to 3 teams. As much as that is how we direct and run education now, I think it's really important that we note that we're looking not for the next 10 years, we're looking out beyond that. And, in 10, 20, 30 years, that may not be the educational model. But I think, Principal Healy said it best, which is what I was going to say, is just because we're building it now doesn't mean we have to fill every single classroom and add staffing because we have those spaces. Those spaces could be used in other ways now. And then, we have flex space. There's other opportunities to use those spaces for different things at this point. And when we get to capacity, can be used, back as specific classrooms. No staffing needs to be added until the students are there that are needed. So I think that argument is a different one to have. I had done my due diligence, much like Cody, and in different ways, but I also was saying I thought 720 gives more ability. Again, when you look back at what's happening, you look at the fact that there's more, housing being built and all sorts of other things. And I think that, again, I think the point was really made, just so I shouldn't add to it, but just because we're building it does not mean we need to use every single ounce of space immediately and add, so there shouldn't be a discussion about adding staffing or changing, class sizes. So I just wanted to put that out there because,
All right. Maybe we could have the St. Rox Festival here. Just kidding. Cody.
Yeah, Tom and Karen beat me to it. When I heard the thing about the student teacher ratio of 13, I just wanted to make it really clear, which everyone already did, that just because the room's there doesn't mean you staff it with a teacher, and that wouldn't be the plan. I think you have to allow yourself flexibility in a school where the population is cyclical, that if you have a teams model, that you're going to have at least some periods of time through the cycle, you're going to have empty rooms and you won't staff them with teachers.
Okay. Well, and thankfully taking it down. You took that down because now I can see you all a little better. Okay, Ms. Downey and Ms. Kowalski.
I guess the question I have is, I know we've kind of gotten all fixated on this. Is there a way to run it for a 700 target? Because I think this is where some of us are kind of feeling conflicted about the 660 might be a tad low, but the 720 might be a little high. I'm just asking Roger and you guys, Fran, I know that it kind of messes up the whole teaching model, but I know Karen Hirsch also mentioned she likes 700 better. I'm just kind of would like to hear your thoughts on saying that's our target number and what would be the impact, or would it just totally muck things up?
I mean, well, what we did was when we had our discussions, we were looking at making the model work for the number of students that you asked us for. So that's what we ended up with. Now, if we take some square footage off the 720, make it, or bring it down to a level for 700 students instead of 720, yeah, it's still going to work. But should your enrollment does get up to 720, that's when you start to feel squeezed again. So, but I'm sure, again, that probably wouldn't happen for a number of years. And secondly, I think that Tom is probably very competent in making that work. And I have all the faith that he could. So I don't think 700 would be disastrous. I just think that it would just start to squeeze that model down if you did go to a three-team system.
I think also what you have to remember, and I think Tom brought this up, and Tom and I talk about this all the time. It's not a cookie cutter thing. You know, it'd be nice if they said to us, yeah, you know, we're going to give you 110 sixth graders and 110 seventh graders and 110 eighth graders. And then in that group, you'll have another 110 sixth graders and 110, you know, it doesn't happen that way. You know, you get ebbs and flows, you get larger groups come in, and that's where the space
Right,
is
but to be
necessary.
honest, I think it's middle school. If we see a bubble coming through, we do
Right.
get it's not like a kindergarten bubble, right?
Right.
You know, we do have a little bit of time.
You know it's coming.
You know it's coming, and you know
Right.
they all show up in kindergarten. You've got 10 years to plan for it. You know, if it's a 1-year bubble, if it's a multi-year bubble, it's a different issue.
Yeah.
But
Right.
but we don't build for 1 year. You know, you have one off year bubble. I just a follow-up question, just in terms of I know there's state security mandates and about space requirements. Just is there any impact of those on the different sizes, or are we consistently applying them throughout?
Yeah, they're the same throughout.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Healy raised his hand. He always gets precedence over the board. Sorry. Go ahead.
Thank you. Well, I just wanted to respond to what Ms. Downey said earlier. So yeah, that was actually the conversation that we had where Fran and I pushed and we said 720 was the tipping point, because I started saying, oh, well, I can just have this world language teacher share with that person and this person. And the whole point was, let's propose the building we would want as opposed to starting from an efficiency standpoint. So to your point, when you're thinking about moving down to 720, if that was a push and we said, we needed to do this because we needed to get the square footage down, we'd have to go in and start carving things out, and we could do it and we could make it work. And like I said, obviously as Ms. Kowalski brought up, we made 720 work in the building we're in now. So, you could make it work, but it's not necessarily the ideal. So, again, depending upon where this ends up and what other questions come from those numbers and facts and figures, I think you could change what you're proposing at 720 to fit 700, but then the population pressure that comes through does make it a little bit more challenging.
Karen Kowalski.
Thanks. So I was thinking something along similar lines that Joe was thinking of, but with a little bit of a twist. And it's more on a commentary basis that I just want to plant for the board as opposed to a question. But in looking at the various sizes that we have, right, the 511, 660, 720, obviously there are cost differentials between those different sizes. And I don't think, to Cody's point, I understand the long-term look at, with the difference of $10 million, but I think we also need to look at that from the standpoint of, okay, that's $10 million right now that we need to fund. And I just pulled up our, facilities master plan. Money doesn't grow on trees, and we all know that. And the fact is that if we build something bigger here, okay, and it costs X, how is that going to otherwise impact the amount of capital that we are going to have in other more recent term years that may affect and impact projects and slow them down? And the question is, are we okay with that? can we figure that out? Can we work that into a budget longer term out? I think we just need to think about that before, in addition to the right sizing. But this is just one of many projects that we have to figure out how we're going to get funded. And the question is, how do we do that? How do we align with our BET friends and making sure that we do get this funded? Because we certainly don't want to end up in a path where all of a sudden we approve these ed specs and then the BET gets it and says, nope, not funding it. Then we're back to square one. And the school still has, that netting and crazy scaffolding along the side, right? We can't go down that route. So I think we have to engage in other conversations with the BET to understand how we're looking at this project and this size in connection with the grand scheme of our other capital projects that are slated for the incoming years, so that we're managing this. And we have to manage this methodically, but also practically. And I just plant that for the board, because it's one conversation we haven't had. We have not raised that at all in all of our conversations about this project. And I think we're all very excited about certain numbers. And I know we're bouncing them along the lines of, let's do 660, 720. This all sounds great. They all have a price tag and they all impact projects that come behind it. So let's take a pause and think about that as well before we make a decision about what works best, right? This is not, I get it. We have a once in a lifetime opportunity with this school and we should make it magnificent. I'm not saying we shouldn't, just saying we need to think strategically about how this project comes and it impacts things down the road. We have Old Greenwich we have to ultimately fund and deal with, and that school needs to get built. Does this project then slow down that project? And I think we just need to take a step back and look at the big picture of all of the other capital projects come up, because we know historically what we get and what we don't get from the BET. And we don't want to put ourselves in a position where we look like we got egg on our face because we got all really excited about a project and then it comes right back at us. It's going to be just as much our fault as it is. We're just going to be just as much to blame as the BET is going to end up blaming. So I think we just need to start partnering up and having those conversations right now. And that's my comment.
1 second. Yeah, Michael Joseph.
So two quick points. I would caution against deviating from these numbers. They say, oh, can we go to 700, things like that. Just tonight and previously there've been a lot of comments about, oh, Teams, is in now, but 50 years from now, maybe not. I mean, middle schools have always been, since middle schools came in, since they started middle schools have been based on Teams. I think as an ed spec, if we're talking about the ed specs, we need to do the opposite. We need to, we've talked about this, we need to stress the teaming philosophy. That's not going away. That's not the same. Teams at middle school, it's not the same as 1960s open classrooms or other fads or things like that. That's very much how middle schools work. That's the point of middle schools, this idea of the teachers all in the same grade, collaborating with each other because kids are in those middle years. And I think we need to make that very clear in the ed specs, and making that very clear in the ed specs means staying with these numbers, one of these sets of numbers. I think that's our responsibility. I think that's part of, what to Karen Kowalski's point, I think that's part of the conversations that we have to have with BET and other people's why these numbers are what they are. I think the other point to consider here and to realize is, if we do end up landing on one of these larger numbers, I think we have to be prepared for another conversation about how we're filling the building. Building a multi-million-dollar building and then growing into it over 20 years or 10 years and having rooms sit underutilized, that's going to be a non-starter for a large part of the town, a large part of our community. We need to recognize that. Instead, we need to think about I think we need to be prepared for conversations about magnet or the redistricting or some other things to think about if we are building it that way, particularly if we're not having that conversation tonight, but I think we have to realize that that's what we're opening ourselves up to. And if we're building a larger building, we're opening ourselves up to a conversation about how we're going to best utilize that space, particularly if our other middle schools are more crowded.
Ms. Costin.
I know that the redistricting issue is not one that we're going to be confronting tonight, but I think it's important to realize if there was a way for families to opt in here because their schools are overcrowded and they feel like they may want an opportunity to attend a school that is not overcrowded, where there are adequate resources for them, that could happen pretty quickly, because if a magnet program was available for students at Eastern or Western, we could fill this building very easily and alleviate an overcrowding issue. So I just think, it's not that we have to force anybody into a school that they're not ready to accept on the east side or the west side of town. But I will tell you, as a parent, if my child were in a classroom that was bursting at the seams and there was fewer resources available to them, I think I would probably look elsewhere. And I don't think that should be overlooked. If we were to offer that opportunity, we could fill this building very quickly. Because, Eastern's overcrowded by hundreds of kids and Western is bursting. So just food for thought.
Cody.
Yeah, I thought Mike made a really good point about being able to defend it, because there has to be logic behind all this stuff. And to Laura's point, I would love to know the kind of like the numbers around how overcrowded Eastern is. I know it's very full, but I don't know what the kind of optimal number of students there are there, but that might be useful for framing up when we think about, right? We've been using the historical levels of Central as a reference point, but in the context of a magnet program, it can become kind of a winner for both of the other school districts. Western, I know I was just there visiting, they have a wait list currently for their magnet program. And they're at about next year, they'll be at all-time high enrollment or very close to it. So getting the numbers around, hey, Western might be a little like have this many more students than is optimal and Eastern has this many more, that can then be sort of a guiding. Again, you don't coerce anybody to have to change their district, but if you give them the option, I imagine there would be reasonable uptake, and then that's everybody wins with that approach, and that will help provide the justification that Mike is talking about. And maybe it doesn't provide it, and then we rethink it and go to a lower number. My hunch is that it would.
Yeah, I have to say, I've just been, in the community talking to a lot of different people, and even though not enough people show up at these meetings, probably to Joe's point, people do always want to talk when they see you in town. And obviously I'm a member of the Central Middle School community. And so they do read the articles. And I just ran into someone the other day at a deli, and then I run into people at games and things like that. And they always say, why would you build it for the current size? I'm so confused by that. And I said, yeah, and I tried to explain it. And then I said, we really do need to think for 50 years out, 50 to 75 years out. And I understand your concern about the prioritization of the other capital projects, believe me, because obviously I've seen how that's been impacted over the past few years. Here comes my Central Middle School student now. Hold on a second, Caroline. But one of the things is this is our chance to rebuild something, right? We're talking about, we have a lot of renovations coming up, but I don't see us starting afresh with a new school. And when you renovate, you can constantly modify, but to build, and anyone who's built their own house, you have to build it right from the beginning, right? And so I think this is a once in a generation opportunity, and I really don't want anyone in 2100, I'm going to keep using that year, to say, gosh, why did they build it for 660 when they actually had data from just prior that was over 700. So I'm kind of circling around 720. But I said that before, so. Karen Hirsch.
Okay, so I have a process question. You know, I think we have all sort of asked a bunch of questions based on the new information we've been given on enrollment and what, you know, those three enrollment sizes and what that would do to the facility size wise. We need to be able to give, you know, CSG the information to be able to build an ed spec based on that number, actually more detailed for us, so we can at some point get to an actual vote on this to give it to a building committee. So my question is on a process. This is a discussion item tonight. You know, we can't vote on anything ed spec wise, but you know, can we, you know, you think I'd know, but I don't. Can we give the information or do we take a discussion here as to what number we want to focus on to ask for those ed specs to be built to that, so that our next conversation can actually be realistic to get to an actual real vote? So I don't know what the process is here, because
Right.
it's 9, almost 10 o'clock at night. We thought this was going to be short, quick. You know, we've graduation tomorrow, a lot of stuff going on. We need to let our administration get going for that. And those who have to write speeches for tomorrow, get to that, et cetera. So what's
Yeah.
the process here?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I mean, we're defining all sorts of new paths here tonight. So I think that the answer, I was hoping for like a sense of the meeting. No, we can't take a vote. So I was kind of hoping that we could give the consultants a sense of where we're heading, but I don't feel like I'm getting that sense actually. Is the challenge.
And if you do a sense of the meeting with just like little hand raises, you can sort of get an idea. My point is we can't, this is a discussion item, but we have to be able to give them a number so that they can actually make the next phase of this go, so that we can vote, so we can give it to the building committee. I see Tom shaking his head yes on that too, so that we can actually get this process going forward. So
Agreed.
I don't really know how we do that.
Well, I'll
but
tell you, I mean,
I'm tired.
I mean, can you all just give me a sense of where you are? I mean, that would be helpful.
Everyone put your hand up. That's for 660, please.
All right, so that's 4, 5. I don't know. I can't say 5. So then
I see 3.
3. Okay,
Yeah,
well,
now I see 4. I see Karen. Yeah, okay.
and then so then it's, so if you're for 720, me, okay, Karen, Cody, and Michael Joseph. I love this nonpartisan vote. This is fantastic. We'll do more of these.
So that's like a 50-50 split, right?
Right.
You might like it, but accomplish nothing. Sorry.
Yeah. Mhm.
I think we're all feeling a little torn. I don't know. I'm
So
speaking for
690 it is.
myself. Which is, I think, why I asked about the 700, because I was
That's
trying
what-
to
yeah.
split the difference, you know? I know one doesn't work with the teams, Michael, but it was like, I was trying to find middle ground.
I know.
I don't know what to tell you. So
Can Roger and Fran go back now, seeing where we are and
come up with 700?
No, just like
No.
look at it harder. No, because we've eliminated the 511, I think, right? I think we all feel, and I think we've all eliminated the 780. That's my sense from the conversation without having taken a vote. I don't know. I'm just trying to think.
Tom?
I just want to say, maybe as frustrating as this is, I think this is exactly what the anticipation was, because we literally gave you the 2 choices here. So I don't know from Fran and Roger's standpoint in terms of, well, it was more Roger, I guess, kind of in a way, because we gave an academic program. So if there was anything else that he was looking into, but I recognize why it's a split, because we literally gave you the 2 options, which is what we anticipated. So sorry about that.
Okay, I don't know where we go from here because it sort of drives the ed spec. So
Well, I have a quick question. Does that mean there are like 2 ed specs at that point?
it's too hard to do. We
You
can't.
That's
can't-
what-
you-
okay.
You have to submit one to the state with your application.
And forget about the state. 'cause
No,
I
no,
think
no,
we're
no, no.
on
I
the-
mean, 2 ed specs to see on where we're at. Look.
Well, I think this
I-
chart gives us the 2. right?
Yeah, yeah,
Really,
Yeah.
the narrative on the ed spec will will change and adapt to the numbers that you folks go with. That's going to be the next exercise, but really there aren't going to be major changes to the narrative other than we just true it up to make sure that it matches now to the student
Square
enrollment.
footage is all lined up in
Yeah.
a number of classrooms.
Right.
Can we just sleep on this? And then
Waiting.
I know, I can't think of I mean, maybe at graduation, when you guys see how the high school is just rocking and rolling, you're gonna say it's 7:20.
no, but I mean, I mean, I'm not saying extend this out, Christina. I'm not saying, okay, we'll
I know,
wait.
I know.
I'm just, what I'm saying is it's 10 o'clock. I'm really, really tired. And I think there's like 2 more conversations I need
Like
to
I'm
have.
making it right. It's a thought. We want to be thoughtful about it. And I got to tell you, and I'm torn because I think there's, like I said, 660, but all the good points about 720. So I think you're right. Like an opportunity to think about things.
Yeah,
I agree.
And I'm really not kidding about having a conversation with some BET members who I personally need to have some more conversations with, because I have to tell you that my concern is going too big, right? And I'm not saying it's too big. Okay, I'll phrase it differently. Going to 720, thereby dramatically or drastically and impacts other projects that we have, that creates a huge dilemma, because Old Greenwich is up to be built.
I think we all feel that.
And so I want to have, before we come to a conclusion on this, I think it behooves us to have a very candid conversation to say, you know, let's say we're leaning towards 720, but how do we get this done when we also have, you know, OG and we all agree we don't want poop in the classrooms anymore. So we can't stall that project for this one either. And as I said before, and as our parents have told us, money doesn't grow on trees. So we have to think about this. And as much as
I also think it is our job, not theirs, to ultimately make what we believe to be the right decision.
I understand.
I think taking input is a good thing.
I'm not saying,
but ultimately it should not drive our decision.
All right, guys, Michael Joseph, then Laura Costin, then Karen Hirsch.
I'm not saying it drives us. I'm just saying input is helpful, because I don't want it to come back to us as rejected.
Yeah.
That's my problem.
I know.
The problem is it's process.
No,
We
I think,
can't decide
Guys,
tonight,
guys,
so what's
follow
the
the
decision
process.
to make a
Order.
decision? That's all I need to know.
Order.
I
Okay.
think
Michael
we,
Joseph, then.
I think we've plowed this field for this evening.
Yeah.
I think we don't have any, I don't think we have any choice but to adjourn and talk about it again.
Joe changed. Down, you're out. I don't need your vote anymore. So.
I told you I was on the fence.
Joe's at 7:20. Karen Hirsch.
What about Karen Hirsch?
That you had your hand up.
Oh, I didn't mean to. No, to me, it's just clearly we can't vote tonight. What do we need to do to move this forward? I'm exhausted. I can't.
I'm ready to vote.
To be
We
short.
should just vote.
Well, we can't vote. I got a sense for the meeting. Do you want to resense it?
Feel free
Okay.
to do a reset,
Kathleen, you can
whatever.
take a formal sense of the meeting resolution. That's a vote, but it doesn't count for anything.
Thank you,
Thank
Michael.
you, Michael.
Okay, so my motion is to move this ed spec to the next phase at the 7:20 enrollment. Kathleen Stowe is a yes. Michael Joseph
Wait, where?
at the 7:20.
I thought now we're going to vote now? I thought.
No,
we-
it's a
I can
sense
take
of
a
the
sense of the
meeting.
meeting. It's a sense of the meeting.
Oh, a sense of the
I
meeting.
think you still need a
Sorry,
second.
Oh, sorry. Can someone second it?
I
Okay,
second.
Karen Hirsch should second it. Okay. So Kathleen Stowe, yes. Karen Hirsch. Yes.
Yes.
Michael Joseph.
Yes.
Okay, Laura Costin.
I'm still at 660.
Okay, that's a no. Joe.
Yes.
Okay, Karen Kowalski.
No.
Okay, Cody Kittle.
Yes.
Christina Downey.
I think I'm going to abstain.
And then
This is a sensitive
It's not,
meeting
it's,
anyway.
it's not going to matter. I just,
Non-binding.
I'm very torn. So
Okay.
I'm just.
And I'm a
so-
yes.
But
So,
remember, there is a little bit of wiggle above the 660, which is closer to the 700. So it's sort of like,
but that was where, well, we just took a sense. I'm sorry. So we
It's
can-
a sense
we
of the
can
me.
continue to debate it.
Frankly, we haven't voted on the ed specs yet.
No.
You know.
But so that's a sense, but it's too close. I mean, it's not where I want it to be. I was kind of hoping that we'd all be on the same page. So, I mean, the sense is that we would be more around 720, but it's barely that. And, let's go enjoy graduation. And I don't know, I'll reach back out to you guys with times to get together.
Well, the bright side is we
no,
eliminated the 780.
There you go. And the 511.
511.
And the 511. Okay.
Or
So can I get a
Let's
motion?
talk about-
Laura,
can we
make a
get
motion, please.
motion?
Laura, make a
No,
motion.
Can we
please.
just get a timeline for when we're going to see the revised ed specs?
We don't have a number.
yeah.
We haven't given
We
them a
just did
number.
it. We just did a sense
Just
of the
did a sense of
meeting.
the meeting.
Oh, well, then I guess that sense. of
No,
the
no. So
meeting-
so what I'm saying is a fully revised with all the little things, the bells and whistles. When are we talking about? And it would be really helpful to the extent we could get it black lined, red lined, whatever the terminology is, just because I think we've all read it a bunch of times, and Fran and Roger, I would hope, or at least highlighted, doesn't mean red line, but just highlighted changes.
Yeah, we can highlight the changes. I think redlining
That would
at
be
this point would be
super-
very messy. Quite frankly.
Right. So highlighting is sufficient, just to kind of flag it for our eyes would be much appreciated.
So,
I'm getting a thumbs up from Karen Hirsch on that.
Okay.
but
It's just so my husband doesn't have to take all the documents and do it for me. He's very excited about that.
that was the word. We just need to be directed. Okay. So if you're telling us that you want us to revise the ed spec now to the 720 enrollment number, then that's what we'll work on. And we're going to need a little bit of time for that because that's going to be a little time consuming. So
Okay. How much time?
2 weeks.
Okay. I mean, I think that, we have 4th of July and everything, as much as I know this committee wanted to begin. I think that it's fine. Because,
And can I also make a request that whatever meeting date we have, I think to the point earlier today, sufficient time for us to review these, because in the hope that we would be voting potentially at our next meeting, I would like to be sure we all have enough time to really look them over one more time before a vote.
yeah.
Like not day of or the night before. I just feel it's important enough that we want to all feel comfortable with them.
Agreed.
Well, like that was said too, so it gives time for others to weigh in, as well. So they have
Yeah.
time to look at it stuff.
Yeah. All right, so we will all be seeing one another tomorrow at the graduation. But then I'll certainly email everyone to try to come up with a date, but once we hear back from the consultant. Okay, all right. I know we're all tired, so let's have a motion.
Can
Yeah,
I just make one public service announcement? It's very quick, which is remember comments to the strategic plan.
Thank you, Karen.
very good. Okay, with that, Laura Costin, can you do your job?
Motion to adjourn.
All right, second. All right, Karen Kowalski. Michael Joseph, yes, Michael Joseph. Yes, Laura Costin. Karen Hirsch,
Yes, please.
Cody Kittle,
Yep.
Karen Kowalski,
Yes.
Joe Kelly,
Yes.
Christina Downey.
Yes, and pray for sun tomorrow.
All right, that passes 8-0. Thanks so much. Have a good night.
Good night.
Thank you.